Let's take a look at some of the different types of inserts you can use in Pro Tools. To start with, we have our basic EQs, and you can see a lot of different EQs that I have here. Some of these come with Pro Tools, some come with the Waves bundle, some come from other third parties. So you will at least have some EQs in your system, and they're used, as I mentioned, for accentuating and de-accentuating certain frequencies. You then have your dynamics plugins. Things like compressors and limiters appear here. And once again, you may have something like this in your system, which comes from Avid. And here I can set some values for my compressor and limiter. We then get to pitch shifting plugins, and you will probably have in your system at least one of these. Perhaps you're going to have the pitch one, and this just allows me to raise or lower the pitch. It's a pretty rudimentary pitch plugin. There are better ones out there. Then reverb, which we'll talk about reverbs and delays in the section on sends and buses. Reverbs are typically placed on a bus so that you can send multiple channels to it. And reverb adds space to your sound. Delay adds an echo to your sound. Anything from a very short echo to create a chorusing effect to a very long echo. We then have a whole series of modulation plugins. And the Air plugins, which come with most Pro Tools systems, have a lot of different things like flangers, or perhaps a fuzz wah. So modulation effects change the characteristics of the sound, as do harmonic effects. You can find some of the same effects, in fact, in both categories. Noise reduction will eliminate noise from your sound. You may have some noise reduction plugins in your system. These are useful for removing things like hum and hiss, but also some of the more sophisticated plugins, like Isotope RX, can actually remove background noise from your recordings. Dithering is useful when you're converting a higher bit rate to a lower bit rate. So let's say you're working in 24-bit audio and you want to get it to a CD, and when you move it to a CD, CDs only can record in 16-bit. So you always apply dither, usually to your master track, to lower the bit rate. And there's a way that it does it so it preserves the sound of your recording. It does it by adding in some low-level noise. It's a little more complicated to explain, but dither is an essential plugin when you're going from a higher bit rate to a lower bit rate, usually placed on the master track. There are plugins that allow you to alter the sound field. For example, there's an Air plugin, one of the ones that is produced by Digidesign, and it allows you to widen the stereo field. You can determine which portion of the field, the low, the middle, or the high frequencies, gets spread across the stereo spectrum. And there are other types of sound field plugins as well. Then you have all of your virtual instruments, which Mike talked about in his MIDI course. You may have some plugins that just don't fit in other categories that are grouped under effects. And finally, you can find some very useful effects in this other category. Things like trim, which all it does is lowers the input signal. So if you have some processing and it keeps peaking, it keeps going into the red, you might need to lower your input signal before you go to the rest of your insert chain. And trim is a very useful plugin for doing that. It just lowers the input signal. So that's a quick look at some of the types of plugins. You should explore what you have in your system so you know how to use them. And of course, there is documentation that comes with your Pro Tools system about all of the plugins that come with Pro Tools, and any third-party plugins you buy typically have documentation associated with them.